So we can start our conference, and we'd like to invite the rector of the University of Milano Bicocca, Professor Giovanna Iannantuoni, who will give her introductory remarks, Professor Nicoletti, who is directing the project Ocean of the Council of Europe, and Olaf Göngden, who is a representative of Council of Europe and also our program. Okay, we'll start, and okay, then could you put the other slides with the name of the introduction? Il tappo numero 1, per favore.
Okay, so good morning. Thank you very much for this occasion to talk about the Istanbul Convention and more in general to talk about issues that are so important, not only for our country, that are the domestic violence and the violence against women. So, as a young rector of a young university and as a woman, of course, I am very, close and also very interested in the scientific community that works on these issues. But also, I think that independently from my, personal, of course, case, universities must touch these issues as we touch all the questions that we ask ourselves in research. That is to tackle these important points from an educational point of view and from a research point of view. And the third point, of course, is the impact that this educational level and research level must have in the society. I think, in fact, that if we think about the future and the idea of a public university as Bicocca, but all the network of universities that is in this very important European projects, then we have to accept the idea that universities, academia, must be the cultural and scientific leader of the country where the universities are. And, in order to be the leader, you have to be coherent, and also you have to accept the cost to enter in the scenario, in the economic scenario, in the political scenario that the countries live. So this is why occasions as these ones are so important to talk in a different way. So of course, speaking and talking about reality, what happens, not only in our countries, but around the world. So I just mentioned a few numbers that I have a daughter, she's 10, and we, read together this small booklet that really is about stories. So about little children, females, that are of the age of her age, so 10 years old, around the world. They started to work at 7 years old, 6 years old, and they do very tough jobs. So they don't have the opportunities that our kids have. And I think that this, especially for women, this, variance of your opportunities upon where you are born continues all the lives of this woman. So these little girls that work since they are 5, then when they will be 20 or 30 or 40, they will not have the same opportunities that we have here. And also, speaking about our countries, consider, and this is, of course, cross-socio-economic scenario, consider the number of violence against the woman or domestic violence within also developed, so-called developed countries. Of course, it's a cultural thing, and I have to say that being a female rector gives me also the opportunity, to see how there is difference being, upon the so-called, being a leading role in your job if you are male or you are female. It's not the same. So it's something really cultural that is within ourselves. So I really wish these projects to reach some, suggestions and some advice to the policymakers on one end, but on the other end, I wish you the capability to enter in the debate, so to have an impact in the true life, in the everyday life of our families and of our country. This is I think, the bet. So really the possibility to talk to the people and to change the mind of our youngest. So I wish my students in particular to live in this university being conscious really that we do all our best to eliminate any kind of discrimination and to protect everybody who thinks to have discrimination, to have been discriminated. And so we have, to start from our house, from our university before going outside. So thank you to Marina, to Professor Calloni for having organized this session. Thank you for your guests. And I'm sure that this day will be really an important day for tackling this issue from a research point of view, but I repeat, mostly I hope that we are all able to change the daily life of our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rector Gian Antonio. We are hoping she's very helping also us in this initiative just to prevent gender-based violence thanks to courses and research and thesis and so on. So we appreciate because it's a common task and challenge. Now the word to Professor Michele Nicoletti, who will some words about what ocean is. And I know Olaf. Oh, Roberto Ola, sorry. Roberto Ola, sorry. Roberto Ola is head of the Human Rights, Dignity and Equity of the Council, European Council. Thank you very much, Dr. Ola, to be with us online, unfortunately only.
Buongiorno. I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. Well,
he's speaking from Strasbourg. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Correct. From the Council of Europe, from the House of the Istanbul Convention.
Volume regia. Scusi,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for inviting me to this opening of the conference. And let me thank, first of all, il magnifico rettore, Professoressa Gian Antoni. I will introduce briefly who I am for the audience there. I'm the head of the Gender Equality and the Human Dignity Department of the Council of Europe. This department covers essentially three major divisions. The first one is the one of gender equality. We do intergovernmental work on policies, gender equality policies in the member states. That is what we call the standard setting, the intergovernmental work, the production of norms. Then we have two other divisions that do the monitoring of the norms. So the first one is the Violence Against Women division that is handling the Secretariat of the Istanbul Convention and servicing the Grevio monitoring body. And the third division is dealing with human trafficking and therefore the Secretariat of the European Convention on action against trafficking in human beings. I'd like to thank a couple of people, a couple of persons before I move on. Very briefly, I don't want to take time to the participants. Michele Nicoletti from the University of Trento and also Olaf Kenningen from the Council of Europe that together are working on this initiative, Open Council of Europe Academic Network, but also Marina Calloni from Unire, Università in Rete contro la Violenza. Let me tell you how refreshing for us here in the Council of Europe it is to see an initiative like this one. It is unique because, as the Rettore has already pointed out, it is not about only research about violence against women, but it's about the role the academic world and education world in general can play in implementing the treaty and monitoring as well, contributing to help us monitoring it. This is encouraging, refreshing, And I hope this first initiative will pave the way to many other initiatives in Università Milano Bicocca, but all around Europe and beyond, hopefully. And count on us from this point of view for any kind of support that we can possibly, within the limits of our means, grant you. As you probably know better than me, the Istanbul Convention has been, unfortunately, the target of disinformation, misinformation, misleading information by what we call in general term the anti-gender movement, this plethora of different narratives from different origin. Despite this toxic way of dealing with gender issues and violence against women, the work of the Istanbul Convention continues. Last year we had 3 new countries that ratified: Ukraine, the UK, and Moldova. And this year the European Union acceded, which is very good news for everybody. But I'm sure you'll talk about this later on in details. The Istanbul Convention has been, as I said earlier, targeted as the symbol of the work on gender-based violence, because gender-based violence is a clear example of violation of human rights. And there is, we are witnessing all over Europe and beyond, unfortunately, a backsliding in the respect of human rights. The Istanbul Convention, in reality, it is based on the work that the Council of Europe has done since many years, before actually the Committee of Ministers adopted this treaty open for signature. And that is the work essentially of the European Convention on Human Rights. The European Convention on Human Rights adopted a certain number of decisions that paved the way, that the basis, they influenced the European legislator. Think about the case MC versus Bulgaria in 2003 that is the basis, if you want, of the Article 36 of the Istanbul Convention on the definition of consent in describing what rape is, moving away from the typical definition based on force or on threat. That is still inspiring some of the countries in Europe, and despite they have ratified the Istanbul Convention. But there are many other case law examples that inspired the Istanbul Convention drafting. Think of the protective measures in Article 51 from the case law Kontrova versus Slovakia in 2007, or the due diligence that countries have in fighting gender-based violence through the decision Opus versus Turkey in 2009. Now, this week, Grevio has just finished. Grevio, as you know, the monitoring body of the Istanbul Convention, has just finished its work. They adopted 4 new reports. And I know that Maria Adriani Kostopoulou, the chair of Grevio, is there with you today. And I'm sure she will tell you a lot more about the work. There are three points that I wanted to make, and then I'll give you back immediately the floor. Is that the Istanbul Convention covers 3 articles that are very pertinent to the work you are doing. And that is Article 11 for the data collection and research, Article 14 on education, and Article 15 on professional training. It is essential for us to have in our member states disaggregated data and quality data in order to be able to understand the dimension of the different forms of gender-based violence. If we do not know the real dimension of those forms of violence against women, it would be difficult to design and implement evidence-based policies. So academia can play a fundamental role in helping us understanding better the phenomenon and designing and evaluating the policies that we try to put together to tackle and try to eradicate this kind of violation of human rights. Again, we are enthusiastic about this initiative, hoping that this will be imitated in other universities in the future. A little word about the future. As you probably heard, in May this year, the head of states got together in the 4th summit of the Council of Europe. They discussed a lot about the democratic backsliding, but in their declaration, in the political document that has been adopted after the summit, the Istanbul Convention is clearly mentioned, and this is one of the priority of the Council of Europe for the years ahead. So the fight has only started. We need to pull together all our resources, and academia is one. Is one of those. And so I wish you a fantastic day today and the day to come work on this topic, hoping we will have other opportunities in the future to work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ola, for supporting our network, academic network, and we do hope to collaborate also in the next future. Thank you very much. So now, as anticipated, I would like to give the floor to Professor Michele Nicoletti, who is a professor at the University of Trento and also coordinator and also of the Ocean European Academic Network of the Council of Europe. Please.
Thank you, Marina. I'm very pleased and honored to welcome all of you to this first Pan-European conference of the Ocean Project, which is focused on the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. Let me first express my gratitude.
Excuse me, Michele, la regia, tappo 1, rimettere il tappo di prima, grazie, e poi quando ci sono le presentazioni, grazie tante.
I would like to express my gratitude to all those who made possible this extraordinary event.
C'è un problema di ritorno con la voce, per cui c'è una doppia voce. Forse dovete togliere quella di prima, di Ola. Ok, ci siamo? Prova, Michele.
Hi. 1, 2, 3. Is it better? I can speak from the table, maybe. Is this better? No.
Francesco e anche Max, potete controllare perché c'è il rimbombo, non so cosa dipenda. Bisogna chiudere il collegamento precedente. Olaf, you have to say to Ola to close the connection because otherwise we cannot go on.
Hello? Francesco, c'è un rientro. Check 1, 2. Prova.
Si prova.
È tutto non so cosa sia successo perché rimbomba. Io lo spengo. Proviamo ora che il dottor Ola ha lasciato il collegamento.
Okay, it's better now? Yeah, great, thank you. So I would like to express my gratitude to the people who made possible this event. First of all, the Council of Europe. They are supporting this initiative of the Open Council of Europe Academic Network, starting from the first idea of the project which I launched and proposed to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe some years ago. Second, the Italian government who gave an important contribution to this first year of activities. The University of Milano Bicocca, the rector, Professor Marina Calloni, Daniela Belliti, Giorgia Serughetti, and all the staff who made a terrific work for the preparation and of this conference. And of course, thanks also to all the members of UNIRE, the first Italian academic network focused on the Istanbul Convention. This is for Ocean the first year of official activities after some years of preparation. We had in July the first summer school at the University of Liverpool, focused on the European Convention of Human Rights, and many other meetings online and in person in Strasbourg related to Istanbul Convention again and to the fight against corruption, the Greco agreement, and this is the first, as I said, pan-European conference dealing with the Istanbul Convention. Beside the European Social Charter, which is the convention related to social rights, complement of the European Convention of Human Rights, which has its own academic network. The Istanbul Convention is the first convention of the Council of Europe which involves in this academic networking many academics and scholars. And this started from the initiative of the Italian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe some years ago when we decided to promote an academic prize for the best dissertation focused on the Istanbul Convention. And this Italian academic cooperation around the Istanbul Convention was the beacon, the core of all the other initiatives which are now under the Ocean umbrella. So this is why I'm very happy to be in Italy for this conference and to work together on the Istanbul Convention. The idea of Ocean is very simple and very clear, to promote cooperation between the Council of Europe and universities, research institutes, and so on. Not only with institutions, but first of all with people working at universities, and especially young people. This is our priority. The idea is that Europe has been created by universities. If we look at the history of Europe, a good part of what we call European culture, European civilization, European history, European values was made by the contribution of the European universities. And we do think that European universities can play an important role today in protecting the European values represented by the Council of Europe, that is human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Altiero Spinelli used to say that Europe won't fall out of heaven. Europe must be created every day. Europe needs our daily commitment. And not only Europe as an economic or political community, but Europe as a community of values. And we all see today that our European values are under big challenges, especially from war. We experienced this war between European countries after the brutal aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, and this is why Russia was expelled by the Council of Europe, unfortunately. And then we have conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan due to the situation of the Nagorno-Karabakh, and finally the terrorist attack of Hamas against Israeli and the consequences, and again civilians and women, and the most vulnerable people are victims of these great tragedies. So I think that in this situation we have to strengthen our commitment for the protection of human rights, of the European values, and this is something that has to be done with the help and with the commitment of all the university and all the people working at university. We need an alliance between Europe and universities. We do think that people working in universities are the most sensible to these values, especially the young people. And this is why we do think that the Council of Europe needs the involvement, the commitment, the help, the assistance, the intelligence of all these people. They can be the best ambassadors of these values, advocating for stronger protection tools at national and international level. My colleague Olaf Köngen will explain more in details the activity of the Ocean Project. I would just to say that it is a very comprehensive project. The aim of the project is to create a kind of platform for networking at research level, what we are doing here in Milan, sharing our common research work on the Istanbul Convention, creating cooperation in teaching program. For example, we had this important summer school in Liverpool, and we can organize more summer school or winter school or PhD program thanks to the universities involved in the project, focused on the values and principles of the Council of Europe. And then we can organize together training for professionals, and Marina Calloni and the University of Bicocca has a strong expertise in this field of training professionals in the field of medicine, social services, police, and so on, especially in fighting against violence against women and domestic violence. And finally, monitoring the implementation of our conventions in terms of national legislation and national policies. So these are the most important things of the project, but of course the success of the project, of Ocean Project, depends on the commitment of all its members. And I'm really grateful to all of you who have accepted our invitation, who are here in Milan to attend the meetings, to participate actively in the session with your papers and reflections, especially the young people. And I really invite you to become a member of the Ocean program. And I would like very much if at the end of this conference, everybody, after these 2 or 3 days of discussion and reflection, could contribute to elaborate on a kind of paper containing some recommendation to the Council of Europe in order to implement the Istanbul Convention. What we have in mind is a very active role of academics in improving the work of the Convention, and not only discussing the Convention, but also cooperating with the institutions in order to strengthen policies related to the Convention. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope you will enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much. Perhaps in the last part of the conference related to recommendations and conclusions, we can also gather something which will raise from the discussion of the plenary, but also of plenary section, but also what will come out from from the parallel sections, so that we can start just after this conference to prepare something as a feedback to the Council of Europe. Thank you very much. Now, Olaf, you have to, deve connettersi alla pagina di Ocean. Are you okay?
So I need to.
Okay. Okay. No, I don't feel it. Ok, potete allargarla questa pagina, dobbiamo farlo noi? Dobbiamo farlo noi. Ops. Ok. Questo come si fa? Aspetta. Scusate, ma non c'è il mouse e... Ok. Non si riesce qui a chiudere. Ok. Ok, should be this one. Ok. It's enough. Perché I'm not able to close this one. Ok. Ok, don't worry.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Buongiorno. It's a pleasure to be here. Has been a long time it took for the preparation of this conference, and I'm very happy that so many of you came. So very warm welcome on behalf of Ocean to the local audience from Milano, but also, of course, for those who took upon themselves the trip from faraway countries. We have today here speakers present from Germany, from Poland, from Turkey, from Spain, and surely from other countries. And I'm very happy that we are able to celebrate today really the biggest event in the framework of Ocean we have had so far. For me, as somebody who has been closely cooperating with Professor Nicoletti almost from the very beginning, not quite, but for the last 3 years, it's a special pleasure to see how this project, from an initial really embryonic idea, which was brilliant in itself, but it didn't have a shape, it didn't have a critical mass, it didn't really exist in a way, but it was developed, and now we see how it bears fruit, and how in the year 2023, after all this preparation, it finally takes off. I don't want to say a lot about the rationale of ocean. You have heard that from Professor Nicoletti. I just would like to give you a little bit more of the background, and then I would like to guide you quickly through the website. Some of you are more informed than others, but I think in general it's very useful to see a little bit, with the help of the website, where ocean stands nowadays. So ocean, as I said, really takes off in 2023. We have had 4 larger meetings this year. This is the 4th one. We had a meeting of the French network on the Istanbul Convention in Strasbourg on the premises of the Council of Europe. We also had, as already mentioned, a more than 2-week-long summer school at the University of Liverpool. Both meetings were a great success. We are most probably, and that's what we are planning now, and we are in agreement with the University of Liverpool, turn this into an annual event. That means we will closely cooperate with the University of Liverpool for the years to come. We had more than 40 professionals and academics. It was a mixed group in Liverpool from, I think, more than 15 countries, also a lot of young scholars, because this is one of the focuses of ocean, and especially also from countries in Eastern Europe. Then after the summer break, we had a meeting 2 weeks ago about the 2 anti-corruption conventions of the Council of Europe, and I would like to stress that ocean, and you see it in the O of the name, is really open in a lot of senses. It's open with regard to member states. All member states are invited, and we have open membership also to other countries beyond our usual member state base, to, for example, scholars from countries that are observer states, either with the Parliamentary Assembly or the Committee of Ministers, and also from states who work in the Southern Partnership with the Council of Europe. Details can be found on the website, but as you know, we have a lot of partial agreements that are also open to countries outside the Council of Europe member states. So this is also true for ocean to some regard. So with regard to activities, 2023 is really the year where we start, and we also have a different kind of presence. I mean, people kept asking me, but where do I find you on the internet? And we all knew this was an issue, because the paradox nowadays is you only exist physically in a way in the minds of people if you have a virtual existence. So the virtual existence since July, fortunately, is there. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to have a look at our website, and you see it on the screen. Unfortunately, I can't make that screen bigger, but it's enough as it is. The website is also, in a way, a good guidance on how to explain how ocean works. So we have here news items on what's going on in the network. So for example, in a couple of days, so what do we have here? In a couple of days, we will have a news item also on this conference. And then we have here a calendar of upcoming events until the end of the year, and a projected summer school next year. But this brings me basically to the next topic, and that's what are the membership conditions? You know, membership conditions are really straightforward. You can find them here under, let me see, under membership. So you, first of all, what are the possible groups that can apply for membership? We have institutional membership, which is consisting of different kinds, either a university as such, but also research institutes or faculties that work within a university can become a member. Then independent research institutions can, as long as they commit to work on Council of Europe conventions, can become members. And then, of course, also national and European academic networks. And then, and that applies to most of you, there is the individual membership. So I encourage you, Professor Nicoletti has already done it, but I also encourage you, if you feel that is something for you, you have worked in the past on, for example, the Istanbul Convention or any other convention, please don't hesitate, fill in the form, which you find, let me see, you find here under Join Us. If you go down, there's the Ocean application form. It's very straightforward, not difficult to fill in. This will land on my table if you click the Submit button here, and I promise you that I will process this as quick as possible, and then it will, once processed, you will be part of the official membership list, and so we have this map here that shows a little bit the geographical country distribution. So if your country is not on the map, you might want to place it there, which can be easily done by applying for membership. So here we have a long list of members. What will happen is, because the projection of this membership database is that, of course, over time it will grow. Right now it grows at a speed of 3 to 5 members, new members per week. And so at some point it will be very difficult to scroll down that list and to have an overview and to understand who is doing what. And so what will happen is this will very soon turn into a searchable database which can be filtered according to country and according to convention. So if you want to know who is working on, for example, the Istanbul Convention in your country, you simply tick the boxes in the filter, and within a second you have, or millisecond, you have all the names of people who work on the same field of interest in your own country, but you can also look, of course, Europe-wide, who's working across the member countries on the conventions you are interested in. So that will become a database that is searchable. Another project is to be found here under resources. This is still to be developed, so there are some links to important texts according to relating to the conventions we have worked upon until now. And in brackets, as I said, the O stands for open, so all conventions are potentially the target of Ocean, but of course we couldn't start with everything at the same time. That would not have been feasible. So we took the Istanbul Convention as the first convention where we wanted to expand and where we wanted to have a substantial number of interested academics. And so when you go to the membership list, you will see that about 80 to 90% have ticked the box of Istanbul Convention, but this is not going to stay like this. As I said, we work potentially on all the conventions. So the second one were the 2 anti-corruption conventions, and then just to mention this, we might go into artificial intelligence. As you know, the Council has prepared a new convention which is supposed to be launched 8th of May in London. So this is something Ocean will also work on in the future. So I will stop here. I've talked long enough. I would like to thank our co-organizers who have done most of the organizational work. I'm very grateful to, first of all, the University Milano-Bicocca for hosting us here. That's a very important contribution, because obviously we can't do these conferences in hotels for obvious financial reasons. So we are very dependent on our partners to make these contributions in kind, if I may say so. And also extremely grateful to Professor Calloni and her team, and I've been watching this from afar for a number of weeks, and they have done a tremendous job in preparing this conference. And as probably has been mentioned already, it will be online on the UNIRE website, so it will be recorded, and then whoever would like to remember what has been said and have a second look can go to the UNIRE website. So I wish you a very fruitful conference, interesting presentations and fruitful exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we'll remember again how to be member of UNIRE, of Ocean in the conclusion of the conference. So a few words, because we have to start really the presentations. As said, I'm Marina Calloni, I'm Professor of Social and Political Philosophy and the co-founder of UNIRE, which I'm at the moment I'm directing, and also I'm also directing the research center ADV, which exists for 10 years with some colleagues here, Giorgia Serughetti, Sveva Magaraja, and Daniela Belliti, who is the coordinator also of UNIRE. So I would also to add that this conference has been supported financially by the Council of Europe, Ocean, by also mainly, by also partly by the Department of Sociology and Social Research. We are based where we are based, and then also we celebrate the 25 years of the foundation of the University of Milano-Bicocca, which in 25 years, as now we have 36,000 students, and is one of the biggest national university in North Italy. So the UNIRE network, we speak what is UNIRE network tomorrow, but the objective of this conference is just networking and just to increase, enlarge also the alliances in an intercultural, interdisciplinary way, because we have to share. This is the main aim of this conference. So few words, because we have also other remarks by Fabio Roia, who has been elected newly as a president of the court in Milan, which is large and has worked a lot for the changing of the language of sentences and just in court how just to avoid the secondary victimization. So he wants to welcome this conference. Secondly, also the welcome remarks by the Honorable Martina Semenzato, who is the president of the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry on Femicide and on any form of gender-based violence. It is a bicameral commission of inquiry based at the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. Third, but not least, I wanted just to read, if you are so patient, as a message by Honorable Pina Picerno, who is the Vice President of the European Parliament. We are also collaborating with. So I read because it's a very important for us just to join also the connection for the Istanbul Convention between the European Council and also the European Parliament, the European Union and European Commission. So Honorable Picerno writes for us. The Istanbul Convention, when it was signed 20 years ago, was a true remarkable result that made history in the fights for gender equality and women's rights. We were looking at this ambitious, far-reaching instrument rightfully with great hope, because we need to repeat it right now, also in this occasion. Women will not be free and equal if they are not free from the fear of violence. Our hopes were not let down, but for sure we have to keep the focus height on the implementation of the measures of the Convention, as this instrument can defend the life of women and girls only if extensively implemented in its entirety and in all territories of the ratifying countries. Grevio has done and is still doing a meticulous job in controlling the level of implementation of the Convention by the parties. The evolution during these years is evident. Many steps forward have been taken. The last one, for which I'm particularly proud, she says, is the ratification from the European Union itself, a step we have fought for many years, encouraging on our path many obstacles, mainly coming from those states who still reject the Convention. We were able, not without difficulties, to overcome these obstacles and finally can say that European Union is part of the Convention. We are for sure not at the end of the fight, but just at the beginning, as you all well know. The implementation of these provisions is far from satisfactory, and the work that has been put forward at the various national levels and now at European level remains a difficult challenge. The European Union is doing its part, and after the ratification finalized this year, we are working, as you probably know, at the proposal of a directive on the violence against women and domestic violence for all EU countries. This piece of legislation could further boost and complete the fight against gender-based violence in Europe, pushing its member states to recognize the real needs of protection and prevention for women. But as it happened for the Istanbul Convention, we are again in front of conservative ideas that are trying to undermine the huge contributions this directive could bring in the lives of women and girls in the EU, and in particular by adding the concept of consent in the member states' legislation, which is in fact lacking in most of them. I'm very grateful for the work you are carrying on, not just today during this very interesting conference, but also forward in your daily activity, putting the protection of women as top priority. The European Parliament is highly committed on this and will never step backwards as long as the progressive forces will be leading this House. Next European election, we'll see. In conclusion, I want to thank you once more for your highly valuable contribution, and I hope the outcome of your conference will be another step forward in favor of a safer world for women and girls. Thank you very much, Honorable Pina Picerno. I will thank her. So we have to construct many alliances. So finally, organization, when you see with these ribbons, blue ribbons, we are, we are in charge for the organization, so any question you have, you can ask us. You have to register, and then thanks, we have to thanks. Of course, I have to thank Daniela Belliti, who is the coordinator, as you know her, speakers and panelists for thousands of email. We have, of course, to thanks also the administration, the personnel of the University of Milano-Bicocca, the press, web and communication office, the logistic office, and also the technicians also help us with all online connection. So now we start with the presentation, and thank you very much.
come facciamo? Mettiamo dentro o che cosa? O dovete farlo voi? Ok.
We had to do it before because other sites is complicated, would be complicated. Okay, we'll see. Yeah, we'll do it later on.
We have think about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have the discussion. So first round 10 minutes, and then we'll have the discussions. Otherwise, we'll not have time for question and answer. Yeah. Okay. Daniele, erano 10 minuti, un quarto d'ora. 15? Ok, 50 minutes, and then we'll see. Okay. Okay. Carolina Villacampa. We start. We met already, but only online, with the conference with the Council of Europe. Now we are here in person. We are very glad for that. Oh, allora.
Max, c'è la presentazione prima sua.
Ok. Prego. Sì?
How to find out the test?
We can find it later.
Se lo può mettere sul desktop, mette sul desktop.
What is your file? Your file, madam.
E porti la cosa sopra. Bisognava fare prima, we had to do it before.
How can we find the like this one? I didn't take my glasses and I can see.
What is the name?
Mediolan.
Mediolam?
Yes.
Allora, il nome. No, we have to give the name, because here there is not the name. There are Mediolanum, which is a presentation.
It's in the.
No, there is no. Presentation and reopening, no?
Oh, shit.
Could you prova a mettere in ordine il
Milano,
nome?
yes.
Okay.
Milano, okay, but it was not the name, okay.
I do for you, madam.
Okay. Because it was not the because we had to do before, because we are otherwise. Ok, ce lo metti Max sulla video? Sullo tappo, ok. Ok, se lo metti qua, ok, bravissimo.
Okay. Is
Adesso
this?
la campa, qui.
Okay. Right
Ok,
here.
bravo. Sì, bravo.
That's not mine.
Okay.
Okay,
Now
if
we
you
found the right
The
file.
line back and forward as well.
This can stay here. Questo è un
Thank
po'
you, Max.
qua, non so, per lasciare. Grazie. Well, good morning, buongiorno. My name is Carolina Villacampa. I'm a professor of criminal law at the University of Lleida in northern east of Spain. I would like to first thank the organizers of this Pan-European conference on the implementation of the Istanbul Convention for their kind invitation to take part in this roundtable on comparative approach on its implementation in northern, southern and eastern Europe. I feel very honored to be here today. Vi ringrazio per il gentile invito, è un piacere per me essere qua oggi. And well, to reflect on the implementation of this international treaty in Southern Europe, which I think is my role in this table. Spain, one of the biggest countries in this region, which has also been considered a pioneer in the fight against gender-based violence, can be taken as a case example. Spanish criminal policy on gender-based violence has been clearly influenced by the grievous baseline evaluation report on Spain from 2020. This document has marked a turning point in Spanish legislation on gender-based violence, but has yet not produced a relevant institutional change in this country, as I will try to show in this presentation. before doing this, it should be stressed that Istanbul Convention assumes a victim-centered approach to combating gender-based violence. This perspective, adopted for gender-based violence, drawing on other approaches to certain criminal realities that had been already tested by the Council of Europe, such as human trafficking, is more comprehensive than the crime-centered perspective or approach, and seeks to safeguard victims' rights through what is known as the 3P policy, to which the P of coordinated policy has been later added. And that this holistic policy, the eradication of gender-based violence, requires not only prosecuting criminal behaviors, but above all preventing them and protecting victims' rights. Istanbul Convention places victims at the center of the institutional reaction to violence against women and makes their protection the key to defining how the system must respond to it. Not as a sole criminal justice reaction to protect helpless women, this is important, but as a comprehensive support system that strengthens their ability to escape violence and become survivors. Spanish public policy on gender-based violence was based on two essential milestones prior to the Grievous report. The first one was the approval of the Organic Law 2004 on comprehensive protection measures against gender violence, which dictated the Spanish criminal policy in this area for the following almost 20 years. It was passed unanimously in the Spanish Parliament and was considered a groundbreaking and instrumental law to raise awareness on gender violence in my country and amongst the Spanish judiciary. It designed an integral victim protection system that required victims to turn to the criminal justice system for protection, take a punitive approach that was soon criticized by the specialists in the Spanish academia. Despite this, official reports on this law by the Spanish National Observatory on Violence Against Women and the Government Office Against Gender-Based Violence have contributed to increase its punitive criminal policy orientation, calling for the strengthening of the criminal measures included in it. The progressive consolidation of the punitive approach of Organic Law 2004 has led a growing sector of the Spanish academia to consider that it might be obsolete for four fundamental reasons. Firstly, because it adopted a mandatory arrest and not drop policies promoted by radical feminism, which was hegemonic in the 80s and has been partially superseded by more contemporary feminist approaches that place intersectionality instead of patriarchy at the center of the system and call for the adoption of less punitive criminal policy program, more oriented toward recognizing agency to women victims of gender violence. Second, because this crime-centered approach does not fit in with the holistic perspective to fight gender violence included in the documents that define the contemporary international institutional policy in this area, especially the Istanbul Convention, as I said. Thirdly, because the Organic Law 2004 has had two application problems. First, the gendered criminal law model this law introduced, the aggravated crimes it created punishing more severely certain conducts when committed by men against women with whom they had had a sentimental relationship was very controversial since the constitutionality of these new crimes was challenged. Second, because this law has been ineffective in reducing gender violence in Spain, at least the number of violent deaths of women. The fourth reason to consider this law obsolete has to do with the three shortcomings detected in its approach. The first one consists of its focus limited to specific form of violence against women, intimate partner violence. The second one consists of the compartmentalization of the protection of victims' rights this law introduced. Its adoption presented the creation of a specific legal status for a particular group of victims. After the basic current act establishing victims of crime rights in Spain, the law for 2015 on the status of crime victims was approved. Keeping in force this organic law entails that victim protection status different from the general one is still remaining applicable in the Spanish legal system. And the third deficit is linked to the punitive approach this law adopted by assuming a gendered criminal law model that resorted to criminal law as a prima ratio. This strategy has also been expressed in more contemporary legal reforms addressing other forms of gender-based violence like forced marriages or stalking, with the sole resource to criminal law, as well as through the provision of mandatory protection orders or the legal prohibition to resort to restorative justice in all gender-based violence cases. Although it was doubtful whether it was appropriate to maintain the Organic Law 2004, the State Pact Against Gender-Based Violence, which supported its permanence, was approved in December 2017. It can be considered the second milestone in the legal approach to violence against women in Spain. It meant laying a 5-year roadmap by identifying more than 400 measures, consequently approved by, consensually approved by almost all groups in the Spanish Parliament, adopted theoretically to meet the requirements of the Istanbul Convention. It sought at the same time to update the content of the Organic Law 1 2004 and its punitive orientation. The necessity to adopt a more comprehensive level concept of gender-based violence, one of the most relevant objectives of the State Pact, derived not only from requirements of the Istanbul Convention, but also from Spanish academic literature and from results of empirical victimological research undertaken in Spain on examples of gender-based violence out of intimate partner violence. Although the State Pact declares the need for a broadening of the legal concept of gender-based violence, the manifestations on which the measures included focus are in fact sexual violence and sex trafficking. Putting the accent in the necessity to deal with offenders, to design treatment programs specially tailored for them, which is another relevant measures included in the State Pact, was something that the Spanish Academy has claimed for. The action included in the pact addressed to protect children victims of domestic violence and to recognize their rights as victims arose not only from research conducted by Spanish academics, but also because high-profile cases of children being murdered by their fathers during parental visiting rights showed the necessity to address this type of violence. Despite the adoption of a few measures oriented to holistically address gender violence, since more intersectional and less punitive academic approaches to gender-based violence were not listened to as expert voices when the State Pact was being discussed at the Spanish Parliament, most of the initiatives included in it are still punitive. Yet, the approval of the pact led to reform the Organic Law in 2004 in 2019 to ensure that women and children victims of domestic violence were recognized the right to be protected without the necessity to report the situation to the police. After this, in November 2020, the Gribio issued finally its first baseline report assessing the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in Spain. Although it highlighted some positive aspects of the Spanish policy to address gender-based violence, such as its pioneering role, it also negatively assessed certain aspects, which are listed on the screen. I don't have time to go through all of them. But perhaps the most salient one of these negative aspects is the exclusive focus on intimate partner violence observed in the efforts taken to address gender-based violence in Spain. As a consequence, Review identified several priority issues requiring further attention from the Spanish authorities to comply fully with the Convention's provisions, and most of these requirements were later introduced in the recommendations of the Committee of the Parties. Among them, the necessity to strengthen measures to prevent and combat violence affecting women exposed to intersectional discrimination, ensure adequate allocation of economic resources, strengthen training efforts for professionals, improve the provision of support services, reinforce the legal framework on psychological violence, stalking, sexual violence, sexual harassment, and female genital mutilation. This requirement, this suggestion is highlighted because it's the only one of pure nature initiative, nature. The rest of them are more of an applicative nature or more institutional. Ensure victim safety by ensuring protection orders, that these orders are duly issued and respected. Ensure a wider implementation of perpetrator programs and effective enforcement of the due diligence obligation. Make sure that victims receive due compensation. Adopt measures aimed at the jure and de facto access to legal aid for victims. And review the evidential threshold for the granting of the refugee status and of temporary residence permit. After the grievous report on Spain was issued, the third milestone in the Spanish legal approach on gender-based violence took place. It was the approval of Organic Law 10/2022 on the comprehensive guarantee of sexual freedom. With a very similar structure to that of Organic Law 2004, to establish a comprehensive state to protect victims of sexual violence includes not only measures to prosecute sex crimes, but also to prevent sex violence and particularly to protect and assist their victims. It was approved not only to comply with the previous report's requirements, but also to observe measures of the State Pact against gender-based violence, and above all, as a regulatory reaction on the controversial ruling or judgment of the high-profile case La Manada, the Hurt, a gang rape that took place in Spain, in Pamplona, by the Provincial Court of Navarre in 2018, which showed the lack of sensitivity of a sector of the Spanish judiciary towards victims of sexual violence and their needs. It includes a broad concept of sexual violence, according to which crimes against sexual freedom, female genital mutilation, forced marriage, harassment with sexual connotation, and sex trafficking, together with digital sexual violence, are explicitly considered sex violence by this law. Organic Law 10/2022 introduces a new second reinforcement standard of protection of victims of sexual violence as a manifestation of gender-based violence to the Spanish legal system, to be added to that already existing in Organic Law 1/2004 for victims of intimate partner violence. Being a more contemporary act, its victim-centered approach is more accurately developed than that of Organic Law 2004. It regulates victim rights, in particular the right to assistance and the right to reparation, in more detail. It also incorporates an amendment to Organic Law 2004 to update the content of the victims of intimate partner violence rights to make them more comprehensive, recognizing them the right to reparation. Despite this situation, the specific protective status of both groups of victims of intimate partner violence on one side and of sexual violence on the other, that these two acts determine is still different, with victims of sexual violence having better options to get compensation than those of intimate partner violence, including an enhanced right to reparation that may go as far as the recognition of multiple sources of public compensation and the possibility of accessing a fund endowed with assets confiscated from convicted persons. What is more, the coexistence of these two reinforced legal status resulting in inequalities in the recognition of rights among gender-based violence victims themselves that may be profoundly unfair. Such injustice can be made worse in certain examples of gender-based violence whose victims do not fall under the protective domain of none of these two specific laws. This may happen in cases of honor-based violence caused by victims' parents or relatives, for instance, forced abortions, which can neither be considered intimate partner violence nor sexual violence. And then these victims have only the basic rights recognized to all crime victims in the law on the Statute of Crime Victims, which provides for a less comprehensive right to compensation and fewer options to obtain legal residence in Spain. In addition to the adoption of legal initiatives, the review report also led to the adoption of institutional measures to address more comprehensively gender-based violence in Spain. The most relevant one is approval in November last year of the State Strategy for Combating Gender-Based Violence 2022-2025, which replaces the obsolete National Strategy for the Eradication of Violence Against Women from 2013, which in fact was in application until the end of last year. This instrument reflects the Spanish strategy relating to the planning and organization of actions integrated into public policies aimed at prevention, awareness-raising, assistance, and comprehensive reparation for all victims of gender-based violence. Its guiding principles are the adoption of a holistic, human rights-based intersectional approach that addresses all women and encompasses all types of violence. It foresees the adoption of more than 200 measures to address to establishing public authorities' responsibilities to face gender violence, to prevention, to victim protection, and to coordinated multi-agency response. Despite the distance in time and the regulatory advances made, however, the manifestations of gender-based violence beyond intimate partner violence, to which the current state strategy pays particular attention, are similar to those to which the former national strategy and the state pact were confined. That is, it pays attention mostly to sexual violence and sex trafficking, again, to which that's digital violence. Moreover, the strategy has been in practice for less than 1 year, so it's still early to assess how its implementation is progressing. So, well, in conclusion, of the measures that Gribio considers that Spain needs to implement to fully comply with the Istanbul Convention, only those of a legislative nature, not yet those of an institutional character, have been adopted so far, mainly through the approval of the Organic Law 10, 2022. However, to respond to the peculiarities of the Spanish judicial reality, even the legal initiatives undertaken are focused mostly on sexual violence, not on other forms of gender-based violence to which little attention has been paid so far, such as honor-based violence, for instance. Besides, the approval of this organic law has not put an end to the endemic compartmentalization of victim rights in the Spanish legal system, quite the contrary, as I have tried to show. And well, finally, as for the institutional and operational actions in need of being adopted, only the full implementation of the state strategy for combating gender-based violence in 2025 will allow an assessment on its fulfillment. And well, that's all. Thanks very much for your attention. I'll be glad to answer your questions or listen to your thoughts during the debate. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There are a lot to discuss. I want to remember that in the webpage of UNIRE, you can find an updated program of the conference, all abstracts, all the names of the speakers, and related information. So you find there all needed information, connection for the parallel sections, and so on. So, and if there are changes, we'll do it immediately. So, but all information are there, CV of all panelists and speakers. Thank you. Now, Monika Platek, University of Warsaw in Poland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have 15 minutes and 2 pair of glasses that I left in the hotel, so I need a help. And actually, you know, the title of this presentation that we are in the round table is Istanbul Convention in Northern, Southern, and Eastern Europe. But the truth is, thank you very much. This is but it doesn't work.
No problem.
I don't know if my glasses can help you.
No, it's fine. That's the only moment I needed really a help, and thank you very much. So the truth is that I think it's not necessarily the north and the east and south that counts here. What counts here probably is the choice that we are making how to deal with the domestic violence in our countries. And we know, so these are the data that are very much repeated in every country, how big percentage of women face the violence, how big percentage of men have no idea that he can rape his partner, doesn't matter if this woman or a man, although in Poland it must be a woman. And the truth is that when we look at facts, they are tragic. A few days ago, the man came home to a place where his wife moved away from him with the son and killed the son and just disappeared. And of course, he is guilty for the fact of killing his own baby. But if we think about it, and if we look into his arguments are about the traditional values and family and how important it is that the man is a head of the family and how important it is that the woman simply listen and how important it is that once he's deprived of it, the whole family is in ruin. So he's ruining what is the most important for that woman that misbehave. And we can say that this is just a psychopath and a man that misbehave. But we can also look at this, to what extent such kind of ideas come into humans' mind. If you look into the possibilities of combat domestic violence, in Poland there is plenty. There is law on family planning that we have from 2005. But in this law on family planning, we had to deprive ourselves from 2 specific articles the first article that was taken straight from the Swedish family code, saying you don't bring up a child with physical and psychological harm. The child has a right to be treated with love. But this little article had to be thrown out because all the members of parliament from right to left knew, we know better. We were beaten up and look where we are, right? What the other article was saying that if a man who is mistreating his family members agree to leave the apartment, we don't use the arrest, the detention. Well, in fact, that was women who were fighting for this article, and I was fighting to keep it in the law, and I lost. But what it means is that we do accept the fact that when it is member of the family who are harmed, we are not using the same tools as we are using for the people who are, for example, beaten up in the street. In 2010, we managed to take away this little article from the law on fighting the on law against family violence, just to move it to the code of criminal procedure. So it is there by now. We also have the CEDAW Convention, and we have an Istanbul Convention, and with this I would like to end, but before we go there, what I think is important, and I might be wrong, and this is for the discussion for you also, is to see the very different way of dealing with domestic violence. And when I was studying the subject, I came to a conclusion that we can at least find out the German, Swedish, Polish, Ukraine, and Russian solution to dealing with the issue. And I was basing it on actually Galtung triangle, where Galtung is telling us that we are dealing what is visible. And what is visible, thanks to the Istanbul Convention, became broader. In Polish law, you recognized physical violence, psychological violence, sexual violence, but you didn't, for example, recognize the economic violence. And in fact, I think that convention is bringing us much deeper insight to understand that there is also a violence which is not visible because it's not physical, it's not evidently psychological, but it is contributing to controlling a person to the extent when the person is actually not able to decide about herself or sometimes himself. So what Galtung is telling us to see into is something that is invisible, structural, and the structural is in the law. An example that I was giving you that we cannot move with the attitude toward children or the attitude of the member of the family is on one side, but on the other side is this what we have in our head. How men should behave, how women should behave, what kind of the condition in the family should prevail. So this is something that we have that affect the law and that affect our reaction on the violence that we perceive. And just making it extremely short, because we will have the German perspective here as well. I think that the German perspective is saying that the human being has a right to be free from violence, no matter if it is street or it is a family. So we don't need a special regulation. We should treat everyone the same way. Well, the Swedish model is actually telling you that no, it's not true. In the street, I can expect being mistreated. But in the family, I have a more need or a more expectation to have a much higher standard of being free from violence. So that's why the behavior that we usually cannot get together and grasp as a violence, within the Swedish model, it comes and get a name, right? It's pushing, it's naming, it's beating up, it's mistreating sexually, it's coercive control, this another type of the violence that is almost invisible, with the Swedish perspective gets to be visible. Then you've got a Polish model, and of course the Polish model is the model where, yes, you have in the law an Article 2007, and we needed actually my former PhD student, Grzegorz Wrona, who had to recognize that no, this is not domestic violence, that the excess, only excess of violence becomes visible, well, then it is very hard to deal with the domestic violence as the problem of relationship within the family. So with the Polish violence, you see an excess, but you don't see the domestic violence as it is taken in the Istanbul Convention. Then you've got a Ukrainian model, and I'm really very happy that at the end we have the Istanbul Convention in Ukraine, and I was working on this like a decade before, and of course it was only for 1 year. For 1 year they have this law saying that there is no domestic violence, there is no violence against women if the woman misbehave, and if the woman makes the person to be so much angry that he has to react. On the other hand, if the woman were not bringing it to the notion of a prosecutor for 3 times that there is a domestic violence, then she was to blame for the action that is taken in her own house. So this lasts for a year, and then in 2011, it had to be earlier. It was removed earlier, 1994. I don't remember the year. But the way of tackling with the issue remained. It was all time perceived as if there is a domestic violence, but it is due to the way the woman behaved. And then we've got the Russian model, right? And the Russian model is that if it is once, if the person is beaten up once, it's not a domestic violence. So British case, that is the newest, recognized after a very long time of searching and after a very long time of getting it names that you also have the domestic violence when it is this control that we can name as a coercive control. So as you can see, it's not geographic, it's an attitude. And if we look into it, well, probably it is much more dependent and much more related to the political situation that we have in the country, and that brings us to treat domestic violence in much more broader sense. Because when we would ask the question, why Istanbul Convention was ratified in Poland in the first place, in the country where for the long time we were fighting for this fetus and for the embryo, but when it comes to the people which were not heterosexual, we treat them as ideology or something that has no right at all. And I think the reason for that are several. I have 2 minutes left. So the reason for that are several. EU climate, official recognition of human rights, and the extreme activity which get out from down to up to really make it. But since I have just 2 minutes, we have to see this also from other perspective. Istanbul Convention gives us tools and gives us names and gives us wording for something that actually exists in our country legislation for a long, long time. Just after we ratified the convention, the government in Poland changed. And as you know, it probably will change again. So we will probably treat this, what I'm saying now, as part of a history, hopefully. But if you look at these 2 things, the reason to fight the convention and the reason to try to get out of convention just following Russian and Turkey and Hungary was this several words included gender and including the stereotype models of behavior of male and female. But if you look at the two, the CEDAW Convention is actually having it already from 1979, and it is a law in Poland from 1982 or 81. And that shows that with just CEDAW Convention, we weren't able, without the tools that we get the convention, to introduce those words into practice. And I'm finishing with what I started. Maybe if the governments implement the CEDAW Convention and implement better the Istanbul Convention, bringing to the males and females heads, that there is no head of the family that is men, but that there's a couple that solve the problems together, and that the violence is not a tool to keep a power in the family, maybe the whole problem in that family would be solved differently and the boy would be still alive. So what starts within the family is really related to the policy that we implement from the Istanbul Convention through the governmental bodies to our everyday practice that change our mentality. Thank you.
Frame of a more general issue, but we know that also the issue of gender-based violence is a not issue in post-socialist countries, also both members of the Council of Europe and of the European Union. And we have here two, visiting a PhD student and associate professor from Ukraine and from Kazakhstan. So then if you want to intervene about also the situation in Ukraine and Kazakhstan as former Soviet republics, then we'll have a few minutes just to intervene. Thank you. Sir, Professor Susanne Noth-Haft of the Catholic University of Applied Sciences in Munich in Germany.
Okay, hi, good morning. Saluti da Monaco. Di Baviera?
Yes. Otherwise, it's a Principato di Monaco.
So I don't try any other Italian phrases, okay? Lessons learned. No worries. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to all the institutions and persons who really funneled time, funds, and energy into preparing a conference, and for all the women power who really did a very meticulous job in preparing it. Actually, I'm very interested in discussing what you showed from different models in detail later. And I brought to you a bit of an insight probably about the intersection and interactions actually between academia and German law politics. I would say that in Germany, implementing the Istanbul Convention was mainly and foremost a grassroots movement. And what academia did was more guiding it a bit, framing it, commenting a bit on it, but actually the dynamic from the middle of the civil society. And now Olaf is unfortunately leaving, but or just taking pictures. But thanks for the ad. I will timely submit my membership to the Ocean Network, because what we need to do is actually getting shoulders close and working in solidarity on the topic. How can I just stick it? Yeah, but it will not work. Oh, now it works. Okay, good. As you can see, we have taken a lot of time to talk about gender-based violence in all forms, domestic violence, inter-partnership violence. In Germany, we started already 2000, and it's an ongoing process. And civil society has always been involved. We have 3 action plans dating from until the last millennium. The newest one is one which is interestingly broader and sets gender-based violence in a global frame. the protection of women also in war times, in times of crisis, etc. As it comes to, let's say, the balance between academia, civil society, and lawmaking, I find always interesting, are there funds and where are going these funds to? And we had quite a broad funding program in Germany. But if you can see, more than half of the funding, millions, got into infrastructure, because actually in Germany we have a lot, but not a sufficient infrastructure. The lesser half of it went into research. This is the innovation strand. And interestingly, and this made it difficult for universities, and we can, let's say, look into the effect later, you can only release the funds if you have a 10% equity fund. And this was quite an obstacle for universities. Other points, like markers for how well did Germany implement the Istanbul Convention on the national level, would be, did we succeed in creating a federal coordination point? Because this is a structure that is needed to, see if the implementation work is sufficiently coordinated. We talked about it for 10 years, and this year we started to have a national working group on drafting how a federal coordination point would look like. We finally ended up in giving the monitoring issue to really an independent institute, the German Institute for Human Rights in Berlin, who is a pure civil society institution. And I would say the third marker for the quality of implementing the Istanbul Convention would be if there's a continuous collection of representative data on all forms of gender-based violence. And if you can see, this is a bit of loose in Germany. We had one 20 years ago, which was on a very high standard from the research design. Then we participated in the survey of the European Commission on Equity, and we are now having a new representative survey, but the problem is the design of that survey is not mirroring the design of the data of 2004, so we are not sure how actually, how talking or how mirroring this research will be. Actually, we could say what we succeeded in is maybe like the other countries like Spain. After signing the convention, our plan was to reform our criminal law on sexual offenses to be on the level of the Istanbul Convention. And after we managed to do that, we finally ratified the Istanbul Convention. We also started thinking about digital violence and introduced cyberstalking as a criminal offense. And what was actually a positive effect on improving the practice for especially supporting victims. We had a psychosocial support during criminal law proceedings, which is at least some sort of theoretical structure. In practice, it's a bit hard to really apply for that sort of support, but in theory, it actually exists. Interestingly, and this was on what Germany did on the national level. If you look into, we are 16 federal countries, and if you look, we don't do all these boxes in detail, but just to get you an overview. We have 16 countries, and I would say besides Bavaria, all have on the regional level a plan of action. And all have, besides the state's municipality of Hamburg, we have a coordination point. This means actually the action was more on the federal country level and as a framework also on the national level, but concerning how victim-centered practice is done, like in support, but also in law practice, is more something which took place on the regional or federal Länder level. If you look on the left side, there is a collection of what kind of research was done on the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. And you can see we have not done it on the national level, but we have done it on the federal level. Some countries did, some others are on the way of doing it. And here you can see some universities. But if you sort of scroll deeper, mainly all of the studies from countries were given to private research institutes. And if you look very deeply into that sort of implementation research, it's a difference to what could have been done on the university level, because the freedom of research is a basic part of our constitutional law. If you have sort of a contract research, which is mainly that, what is done in Germany, it's very descriptive. It's mapping, but not modeling. It's not contextualizing. It's not building models of what is coercive control, how are patriarchal structures mirrored in law structures. If you have also this extramural research on a contract research base, the quality and the face of research differs. And this is what we are experiencing in Germany. And this is, if you remember, the upper point somehow related to, can I release funds? I have to pay at least 10% of it on my own. And universities like mine, we don't have like treasure troves where we can just pop up with money to release funding for research. Sometimes the tricky stuff is into how the proceeding for the funding is done. I would say all these national and federal plans of action had a positive impact, I would say, on the discourse and on the exchange and knowledge production as it comes to gender-based violence, and in the later years also for the Istanbul Convention. But if you look into how practice was evolved, law practice as well as support practice, I would say the difference was actually made by the action plans on a federal level. Interestingly, the most effective sort of breathing into discourses and putting more quality to discourses on practice and on law was if communities or municipalities decided to have a plan of action. So for example, Munich, my hometown, we made a communal action plan on implementing the Istanbul Convention under the umbrella of the European Charter on Gender Equality, which tackles municipalities, and so they could release funds and sort of concentrate on implementing the Istanbul Convention on a community or municipal level. I just brought, I think we can just, regarding our common and shared time, we can just skip the level. They are rarely done surveys which cover national questions, which cover a broader or framework questions. This is just a few because they are just a few. I brought you some of the best practice structures I found, and if you look into them, that had all been structures who had been existing since the 2000 years, where in Germany we started discussing how a better protection against inter-partnership violence could be done on a legal basis as well as on a support basis. As you look into it, it's mainly civil society, shelter movements, victim support movements who had themselves empowered by having now the Istanbul Convention. But it had been discourses which had been started decades ago and had been sort of a push after the Istanbul Convention. The only thing, because I thought we should be here also to think about how could academia finally contribute to implementing the Istanbul Convention on a national or federal level. And the only project who was funded on a national level but really did some substantial work on the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, and it could be sort of a best practice model, was a collaboration on a trans-professional level. There had been psychiatrists, sociologists, and lawyers who worked on creating an online manual for everybody and anyone who works with survivors of interpartnership or gender-based violence. And it had been a private-public partnership. You had been universities collaborating with extramural private research institutes. And this trans-professional and public-private partnership. This was sort of a good recipe for having a good and solid manual on gender-based violence. What you can see is in Germany that we have quite a lot of initiatives, projects, promising practices. We have some data collected and we have some studies done. But I would say it's still a bit a landscape of at random. It's not a sort of coordinated work on the implementation of the Istanbul Convention. And if you look in our bucket list, it is very close to what the colleagues told about Poland and and also about Spain. So we have dedicated women working in anti-violence support networks, but they are insufficiently funded. And we don't have enough funds for creating enough shelter places, even in a rich country like in Germany. Several professions, I would say, require more systematic training in the mindset of how do we really understand inter-partnership violence, like the concept of coercive control, for example. It should be a standard of all working on it. And this points to one of the, I would say, biggest challenges for Germany. We actually don't do good in the Article 30 of the Istanbul Convention, safety first in domestic violence and visitation rights, civil proceedings. It does not work. Because in German courts, the question is, the Istanbul Convention, is it really binding? And if it's somehow binding, why should we focus on safeguarding the safety of the parent who's experienced violence and their children? We didn't work on questions like femicide, having interpartner violence as aggravating circumstances. We don't talk enough about intersectional secting forms of discrimination and violence, and we actually don't have enough data collected. Maybe you can read this, because on your own, this is how I try to find traces for where did we certain mission work, where did we research or educational work as academics in Germany. Interestingly, to put it in a nutshell, I would say the landscape in Germany lacks from a good and solid cooperation between law and sociology, for example. There has been prejudices against it professions on both sides, and we have very few high-profile feminist legal scholars who could really make a difference in the legal discourses on how and why to implement the Istanbul Convention. And maybe my last minute, I like to quote a colleague, because we all have noticed that there is an EU directive on the way, which is, I think, highly problematical, because if it goes through like that, it will be a definite backlash on what we have achieved in the Istanbul Convention. She writes, patriarchal populist leaders, governments and allied organizations pursue three distinct tactics to undermine women's and LGBTIQ plus human rights. These are controlling, altering, and deleting women's and gender rights. Like the control, alt, delete commands on our computers, such tactics reboot human rights systems. They force women's rights defenders to stop, restart their work, and go back to arguing for basic gender equality. And my fear is that we have reached just now on exactly that point in the discourse on the implementation on the Istanbul Convention. So I can just thank you for your patience, for your time, and plea for solidarity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have, thank you for all your presentation. We have 10 minutes, more or less, for questions and answers. And then 5 minutes just to change for the new panel, 45 minutes. And the lunch, if you need lunch, on the back of these buildings, there are a lot of bars and restaurants, so you don't have a problem just to find a place where to eat. So now I would ask to Antonio Sibiglio to ask us just with a microphone for questions from the audience and then a feedback from the three presenters. Who wants to raise hands? Because we have seen that there are differences among these North, Southern, and Eastern Europe, but we have a common also problems and perspective to share. Questions? Yeah. Could you present yourself?
Grazie, buongiorno. My name is Aneta Ostaszewska. I am also from Poland, from University of Warsaw. I am a feminist researcher, and I have a question which is quite provocative and controversial. But we are in this place with so many experts, law experts, so I am very interested in your opinion. My question is, if we know that victims of violence are mainly women and perpetrators are mainly men, wouldn't it be easier, at low level, to call things by the names? Because, if we speak about victims of violence, why don't we use the word women? Because women are mostly the victims of violence. So, gender is an academic term, and it's a great term to theoretical discussion, and I have nothing against it. But if we think about public discourse, I think it would be easier for people to understand that what we are dealing with is the situation when it is not a gender that experience violence, but mostly these are women. So I would be grateful if you could, give your opinion on this kind of question. Thank you.
Women and gender against any neutralization of the issue. Who would like to intervene? From Ukraine? No? No. Kazakhstan, former Soviet Republic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jean Solou, and it's okay if you don't get it for the first time. I'm from Kazakhstan, and I'm a PhD student. I really enjoyed all of the presentations, but I think that the one that pushed us a lot, and it was the one about domestic violence. And to the previous question, I was about to add something, is about gender things. Firstly, when we're talking about victims are mostly women, well, that's quite okay. But in our countries in Central Asia, the aggressor is not always the man, unfortunately, because we have that cultural, the one that you said, it's not only direct violence, it's also a cultural violence and the structural one, where young woman is also affected by the family of her husband, her partner, and so violence can come not only from the man directly, but from the family, from the mother-in-law in particular, from the father-in-law also. So it's not the gender issue itself, it's about the possibility for a woman to defend herself in front of, to respect her boundaries, not only in the topic of the partner, but also in the topic of the whole family, of the whole society, unfortunately. So, yeah, that was my comment. Thank you very much.
Is developing a research on authoritarian leaders in the post-Soviet states. And so this has a lot to do because they don't challenge domestic violence, also because they were former democrats and then became very authoritarian, mainly also in Central Asia. Other questions? No? No? Okay. So if you can answer, I would say 3 minutes each, and then 5 minutes just to change the round table.
Well, It's not provocative, actually, question. It's a very good question, but there are two answers to it. First of all, look at the name of the convention. The convention is against violence, violence against women, right? So the women are in it. The truth is that the family were added during the discussion in Council of Europe. And this discussion is valid. And if you read in the text, it is stated that prevailing element is a violence against women and children, and that's true. But it is also true that the men are victims of that violence. They are victims of that violence within the same pattern. So what we are doing in this convention, we're trying to change the stereotype cultural values, because that brings this mother-in-law to being really an active aggressors in the Kazakh family. The fact that you have to give up your first baby for your family is totally abnormal from the perspective of the equality in the family. And the fact that you can be person that decide about yourself only when you are a mother-in-law and not a mother and not a young person, it's a cultural values. So I think that although at the beginning we wanted to concentrate only on women, we would lose the pattern and we would lose the historical development that creates this gender issue that we want to fight. So I think it's okay to stress the women, but to also include men who are old men, brothers, young sons, and so on. And yes, in that situation also women can be the one that use the violence.
Yeah, very briefly, in fact, to agree with Monica, I think that, well, if we speak about women in certain legal systems, things are called by their name, and are the women the only one who can be victimized by this kind of violence, which sometimes may produce exclusions. For instance, not paying enough attention to children, or even to people who are non-binary and cannot be identified with women from a biological point of view that can be also victimized. So I would say that from an intersectional perspective, perhaps the reference to women, if we understood by women only biological women from birth, can be too much, can exclude many collectives that might be discriminated and might be subjected to violence. So I think that women, the big thing to understand or to refer to it now is that what we understand by women, if we choose to refer to women instead of to refer to gender, because someone has said, I think it was Judith Butler, that sex as gender can be also performative. So perhaps when we refer to women, we have to think about a very comprehensive term of women. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I would totally agree with your statement, but on the other hand, if it comes to the Istanbul Convention, she was drafted in the years between 2007 to 2010. And during that period, fluid gender identities were just not an issue. Though this had been drafted in a very binary thinking of there are two sexes and there is a particular segregation and being affected by violence. So whenever I talk or enter discourses on it, I always start first saying there is a gender bias, because actually I would support like calling it gender more than sex, because we have a lot of biological discussions. Who is a woman, who's not a woman? Is it enough to self-identify as a woman? So I think the gender, for me, the gender is a more inclusive term than sex. And actually you have to be, anytime you speak about it, clear that certain genders are more affected and more vulnerable than others. Interestingly, if you go to how funds were distributed in Germany, maybe you share that. Women Project really fought for years to get sufficient funding. When we discovered the male survivors of interpartnership violence, shelters popped up, counseling structures popped up, funding was not the issue. And for that, it's important to always stress that the serious amount of people being affected by interpartnership violence are persons who self-identify, I would say, as women. So maybe it's like in everything, you have to speak clear but differentiated. And so the question nailed it. Thanks.
Susan, sorry. Yes,
Actually,
Monica.
I would like to ask the question because it's, we started gender studies in 1995, but it never really grew into something big. And it took me like 20 years to bring up the subject that I was teaching named gender, sex, and law, right? The sex and gender was for a long time excluded. And actually, after a year, they asked me to turn back to criminology. So what I want to ask you, following the Susan statement, how far at the academia you have the subjects you're teaching really, or you can learn about gender, sex, law, and Istanbul Convention within the title of the subject that is provided and taught, just in the legal section or in the other section? Do we have it? Do we teach Istanbul Convention as a separate subject?
We try to make in an intersectional way, spread in different disciplines and just interdisciplinary courses we have for many years here at the University of Milano-Bicocca, so we try to do it. It will be a new challenge. Thank you very much to our panelists. And now, just minutes to change our panelists. So next one will be on the round table. Femia, Radosveta, and Josipa. Okay, thank you. If you can come here. Alla regia avremo poi una relatrice online. Ok. What? Stick. Oh, you had to tell us before. Max, abbiamo bisogno di un altro da mettere online, un'altra pennina, grazie. No, we cannot. You had to tell us before because.
No. I won't show the presentation. No, just the picture. So if it's not a USB, if you can put it here. Okay, thank you.
No, I have the.
No, it's.
Okay. Nice to meet you. Marina. Are you okay? How would you spell your name?
Geran. Like Geronimo.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to show this and I will use my own computer.
I don't to check because all our presentation was on the other stick.
Okay.
So now Max will take out. Yes.
Okay, I will just show a picture and I will continue with my.
But
with my
don't worry.
picture.
We'll
Okay,
put.
this one. This one.
But you will put
Is better
only in
right
yes
here?
in the
Okay,
folder,
okay.
so that we'll all.
I get it now. Sorry.
No
No,
problem.
because as I told you, otherwise it's a
Okay.
mess.
Soren,
Yeah, that's
here we
all.
are.
That's
Okay.
How do you say Sharon?
Jeren.
Jeren.
Jeren. Yeah, that's just a picture for.
Oh, well, that's in a full screen version. Bingo. Also, when my colleague, I give the okay.
Okay.
Mi ricordo più chi è.
Can you show it? If you close it?
No, it's not possible.
Okay.
Because if you close the PC go in standby mode.
My computer then. No?
No, we can use just only this one.
This one.
Yeah. Do we have a presentation also?
Yeah.
You can put on a USB.
Not show it and just close it and then I can use my own computer.
No,
Okay?
no, we can use it just on this PC, not
But
the other.
I will just read. I don't need to show the slides.
Okay, we can charge your presentation here.
And not show it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry,
This one.
Okay, so you have two things
Yeah.
to do. The photo and your presentation. Okay?
I just don't want to show the presentation, my
Okay.
presentation, okay?
Fantastic. Okay. Good. Where is it, your presentation? In
Here,
Milano?
Milano. No, not this one. This one, third one. Third one.
Third one. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, my colleague give the
I can return.
Well, we can restart with the last roundtable of this morning, and we'll finish at 1 o'clock. So this, before you have seen the comparison of cases in Northern, Southern, and Eastern Europe. Now, the topic of this roundtable is why so much the resistance against the Istanbul Convention, the Turkish, Bulgarian, and Croatian case. The presenter are, I have to apologize because I'm not sure whether I will pronounce correctly your name and surname, so I'll try. The first speaker is Ferenye Seren Akçabay of the Istanbul Açan University in Turkey. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Ceren Akçabay from Istanbul. Quite funny because Istanbul is a place now we cannot implement the Istanbul Convention. So I would like to especially thank to Ocean Network for including Turkish academics despite the withdrawal decision. And today I would like to briefly discuss the process leading to Turkey's withdrawal decision and try to explain the similarities and differences of Turkish experience with the Istanbul Convention opposition in Europe. And I hope this will shed light on some of the issues that need clarification. As you all know, Turkey withdrew from the Istanbul Convention in March 2021 by a presidential decree. This was a controversial decision, and Turkish courts haven't overturned it yet, even though there have been a lot of legal challenges. The European Council has unfortunately also recognized this withdrawal decision. It's worrying that Turkey, the first country to sign the Istanbul Convention, withdrew from it after 10 years of implementation, especially considering the discussions about the convention throughout Europe. For people who do not know much about Turkish politics in the last decade, Turkey's decision to withdraw may be surprising, as the same political party that was once proud to be the first signatory of the convention in 2011 decided to withdraw it 10 years later by calling it a social wound. Turkey's withdrawal from convention was not unforeseen given its increasingly authoritarian path over the last decade. The ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, is a conservative party with a strong emphasis on traditional family values, but when the AKP came to power in 2002, it enjoyed support from women due to its lifting on the ban of headscarves in the universities and also its political discourse on freedom. In the early years of its rule, the AKP pursued a two-sided gender policy. On the one hand, it promoted gender equality in line with the requirements of EU accession process, and on the other hand, it adopted family-oriented policies that reinforced the traditional roles of women as mothers, wives, and caregivers. As the AKP got more powerful, it began to attack women's rights and gender equality more systematically through policies that didn't see women as equal citizens. This became especially clear after the controversial 2010 referendum and AKP's third victory in 2011 general elections, which marked a change in their policies. In 2011, General Directorate of Women's Studies and Problems was abolished and replaced by the Ministry of Family and Social Policies. This wasn't just a symbolic change. It meant that discrimination against women was now seen just as a social welfare problem, and women turned into object of protection rather than subjects of rights. Although the AKP tried to portray it as if it was still taking democratization steps by signing the Istanbul Convention in 2011, it soon began to be said that the convention would be implemented in a way that would protect family. Law number 6284, which implements the convention, was called the Law on the Protection of the Family, despite the criticism of gender equality advocates. The reversal wasn't limited to interpretation of Istanbul Convention. In the early years of the AKP's rule, the leaders acknowledged the rights of LGBTIs. But after 2010, they started expressing that homosexuality was against Turkish cultural values. Another sign of the decline in the gender equality was the government's attempt in 2012 to shorten the legal abortion period from 10 weeks to 4 weeks. Women and LGBTs responded to these family-oriented policies by taking to the streets and demand equality. They also played a major role in the Gezi Park's protests in 2013, one of the largest mass democratic demonstrations in Turkish history. After 2015 elections and the coup attempt, the government's authoritarian side became more obvious. The women's movement, LGBTIs, and their organizations have been repressed by the state. The Parliamentary Divorce Commission report in 2016 was a new beginning in the gender policies. The report recommended regulations like decriminalizing forced child marriages, restricting women's alimony rights, family mediation in divorce cases, and making it hard for women to get protection orders from abusive partners. AKP tried to use the legislative process to limit the existing rights of women, LGBTIs, and children based on this report. In addition to these attacks, in 2019, Ministry of Education and Council of Higher Education condemned the concept of gender equality and declared their commitment to gender justice. The main opposition here was to equality, and as President Erdogan has frequently stated that he did not believe in gender equality and that it was against human nature. In the last 4 years though, the concept of gender justice has also abandoned, and they're now using different kinds of concepts because of the influence of anti-gender movements in Europe. Gender study courses, theses have been obstructed, and gender research centers have begun to transform into women and family centers in the universities, for example. In response to all these attacks, women and LGBT people confirmed coalitions and regulations attempts on alimony and forced marriages were blocked by them. The government's attempt to withdraw from Istanbul Convention took place in this atmosphere, and it was possible because of the new presidential system created by the 2018 constitutional amendment, which is the last step of authoritarianism in Turkey, which we call it also the last nail in the coffin. Nevertheless, the government didn't target the Istanbul Convention until 2019, when the pro-government press started criticizing the convention. A group called Turkey Thought Platform, made up from former AKP MPs, then submitted a report calling President Erdogan to withdraw from the convention, and the report claimed that the convention damaged Turkish religious, social, and cultural values, weakened the family, and tried to eliminate natural identities. In June 2020, Erdogan encouraged this criticism, claiming that the convention was a tool for Western imperialist powers to control Turkish society. The pro-government groups also proposed a new international family rights convention to be signed with Islamic countries. They even call it Ankara Convention. It's quite funny. Yet, despite the efforts of organizations close to the government, the public did not support the withdrawal decision. In fact, the resistance of feminist and LGBTI organizations helped to postpone the decision for a while. That's why the announcement of the withdrawal decision early on Saturday morning felt like a raid. After the decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, women and LGBTI community held mass demonstrations all over the country. Even though government leaders said that the decision was final, people continued to protest despite the risk of police violence and COVID-19 pandemic. Resistance to withdrawal wasn't limited to demonstrations. Individuals, organizations used strategic litigation in a way that had never been seen before in Turkish history. Women's group, Ordinary Citizens, 77 board associations filed thousands of lawsuits to demand the decision to be annulled. Public opinion polls also showed strong support for the convention, despite the government's efforts to legitimize the decision. Even though most people support the Istanbul Convention, and feminists and LGBTI community have fought hard to reverse the withdrawal decision, it is still standing. The victory of AKP and Erdogan in the last election this May was a great disappointment for gender equality advocates. But the fight is not over yet, and the Constitutional Court is expected to rule on the legality of the withdrawal decision soon. However, the government is also preparing to take new steps to destroy gender equality. The government declared that they are working on a constitutional amendment that would redefine, let's say, family as an institution consisting of men and women. And they are also still working on limiting alimony rights and passing a family mediation regulation that would allow Islamic law to be applied. Now that I've given a quick overview of the Istanbul Convention process in Turkey, I would like to briefly discuss the similarities and differences between Turkey and Europe. I think you may have already noticed some similarities between them. For example, gender policy in Turkey is largely reduced to the protection of the family. The purpose of protecting the family is also frequently mentioned in the arguments developed against convention in Europe. Despite the emphasis on localism and the rhetoric that demonize international institutions, opponents of the convention are also organizing at the international level. They are even preparing drafts of international family conventions. Similarly, although civil society organizations are blamed as partners of foreign powers by these groups, they themselves organizing in a similar way and benefit from international institutional support through these pro-governmental organizations. There's also a serious homophobia and transphobia hidden within the discourse of Holy Family. In Europe, as in Turkey, LGBTI community is seen as a foreign element to the national culture. And the gender debates and the convention itself are also condemned as a tool of Western imperialist powers to control societies by accelerating homosexuality and destroying families. However, in Turkey, opposition to gender and Istanbul Convention is not based on a mass movement like in Europe. Rather, government-backed groups are trying to promote these policies. For example, although a few rallies were tried to be organized against the Istanbul Convention, also against the LGBTIs, the participation was limited to a few hundreds of people despite the intense propaganda and support. Due to the high rates of violence and abuse in Turkey, people agree that it is a necessity to protect women and children from domestic violence that occur in family rather than protecting the family. As a result, it is not possible to produce an anti-gender equality rhetoric within the frame of children's rights or right to privacy in Turkey. The opposition has both support of the masses and the upper hand in the right discourse. Apart from these similarities and differences, I think there's a larger parallel that needs to be highlighted in the current discussion. Although the AKP has implemented gender policies centering on the protection of the family since it came to power in 2002, the transition to anti-gender politics took place after 2010, just like in Europe. I have to draw your attention that this is also the date of the rise of the new authoritarian populist governments, as revealed in the literature of anti-gender. Oops, are you okay? Yeah, as revealed in the literature on anti-gender movements. Authoritarian populism emerged under the influence of the 2008 economic crisis and mass protests that spread around the world from 2010 onwards. Gezi protests in Turkey that I mentioned was one of them. Although 2011 was the year that the Istanbul Convention was signed, opposition to gender equality has been on the rise on the world since 2010. While the failure to solve the problems caused by neoliberalism opens the door to right-wing populism, populists who form alliances with conservatives blame outsiders for all problems and offer their society for restoring the order and returning the good old days when everyone knew their place. Yeah. The most significant evidence of this attempt is to transform gender debate from an equality demand to conspiracy theories about extinction of family and reproduction. Of course, the family that's being defended here is not the family consisting of single parents and their children or egalitarian families. It is the family that subordinates women, children, and the elderly, subjects them to the hegemony of the men oppressed in the economic market. To build this future, it was undoubtedly not possible to defend eliminating gender-based violence or Istanbul Convention. The efforts of populist governments in Turkey and in Europe to prevent abortion, for example, and divorce and keep unemployed women at home with social support payments within the framework of family protection policies are also steps taken in this regard. I think it is important to emphasize this because while the European Union's approval of the convention has made us all hopeful, I do not think that the opposition to the convention and more importantly, the opposition to gender equality can be prevented without reflecting on these historical and social developments that could create similar backsteps. In summary, I'm saying that Turkey is not that far from Europe. Thank you.
Of course, Turkey is not far from Europe, mainly these days with the new geopolitical situation. But as you know, it's a very interesting case, Turkey, because the Istanbul Convention, I mean the Convention of the Council of Europe, was signed in Istanbul in 2011. Turkey was the first country which ratified the Convention in 2012, Italy ratified in 2013, it came into force in 2014, but Turkey was the first country which drew from the convention, and so which a lot also of opposition and protest. So now we see what is going on, and thank you very much. Now other cases from Eastern Europe, that is the Bulgarian and the Croatian case. Radosveta Vasileva is online. Francesco, è tutto a posto? Grazie. Okay, welcome. Radosleva. Unfortunately, some guests didn't feel so well, just were not able to get flight or train to come here. Thank you.
I hope that you can hear me. Thank you very much for the kind invitation, and thank you also for hosting such an impressive and much needed
sorry,
conference.
are you on video? No, Francesco, non si riesce a vederlo in video? Ah, ok.
So, yes, thank you very much.
Welcome also online.
Yes, and also for giving me the opportunity to participate online. Now, I have to report on Bulgaria, which is not always easy.
Volume,
Bulgaria...
per favore. We didn't hear so well. It's too low. I mean, level, the tone.
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Just a sec. Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have to report on Bulgaria, which is not always easy because Bulgaria has a serious problem with domestic violence. So to give you official statistics, 33%, 1/3% of Bulgarian women have experienced domestic violence. And there is domestic violence in 25% of Bulgarian families. Meanwhile, Bulgaria is one of the countries in which the Istanbul Convention experienced a severe blow. And in a nutshell, this blow is the result of populism, lack of political will to ratify the convention, rule of law decay, including court capture, and also, as I hope to explain later, legislative sloppiness. So you can accuse Bulgarian legislators of lacking the skills to properly implement the convention through the back door. So for those of you who don't know, in 2019, Bulgaria's Constitutional Court delivered a highly controversial judgment declaring the convention incompliant with Bulgaria's constitution. Sadly, their reasoning is quite dubious. They invented an alleged clash between the term gender in the convention and the social role of women, as they felt was prescribed by the constitution. So the key weapon they used was actually an article in the Constitution that defends children's rights. It prescribes free obstetric care to women. And Bulgaria's Constitutional Court used this article to conclude that the social role of women in the Constitution was to give birth. And you already see how controversial that is. What about women who haven't given birth? What about women who have become mothers by adopting? Have they not fulfilled their social role as women? The problem with this judgment is that it's not subject to appeal. And second of all, because of the principle of res judicata, things have already been decided, it cannot be reversed. So we're faced with a legal impossibility to reverse this judgment, and therefore it's legally impossible from now on to ratify the Istanbul Convention in Bulgaria. This is what many commentators cannot understand, that to resubmit this question to the Constitutional Court, we need to modify the Constitution. And that's, first of all, complicated because modifying the Constitution is a complex process, but also it's not clear what should we modify. Should we remove obstetric care, free obstetric care for women? So you see that we're faced with an absurd situation. And I think that there are two sets of questions that we should analyze. First of all, How did we get here? Why are we faced with such a controversial judgment? Why was this possible? And second of all, what could we do from now on? Now, when it comes to the first set of questions, context and timing in Bulgaria is everything. So the Istanbul Convention was signed by Bulgaria in 2016 without any problem, without any controversy. All of a sudden, a year and a half later, there was massive hysteria in the media, which eventually led to this judgment. And it's very important to keep in mind that we had a change of political climate, if you wish, because when the Istanbul Convention was signed, Prime Minister Borisov was leading his second government, while when the controversy erupted, he was already leading his third government. And the third government was a coalition with three nationalist parties that were committed to, controversial rhetoric, if you wish. But they were at the forefront of the attack against the Istanbul Convention in Bulgaria. So what happened was that all of a sudden we had debates in the media. And here I need to clarify that in Bulgaria, media are not entirely free. So very often when you see debates of such large proportion, you can safely suspect that there's some tacit approval by the government. And in response to this debate, actually, Parliament organized a public discussion about the Istanbul Convention. And here there was another bizarre moment that this discussion was dominated by obscure church groups and by representatives of the Bulgarian church. The debate became so absurd that at some point leading Bulgarian priests claimed that the Istanbul Convention would lead to the spiritual death of humanity. So then, in response to these peculiar conclusions, 75 members of Bulgaria's parliament submitted a request for review of the compatibility between the Istanbul Convention with Bulgaria's constitution to the Constitutional Court. And you can interpret this in two ways. First of all, you can see that actually these 75 members were all from Prime Minister Borisov's party. So you can interpret this as a political favor. They were trying to please the far-right coalition partners in government, but also you can see this as an artificial attempt to mislead Bulgaria's European partners, the international community, that there was some problem with the compatibility between this international document and Bulgaria's constitution. Now, when it comes to this court, several clarifications should also be made. This court is not part of Bulgaria's justice system, and it could become susceptible to political influences because of the way judges are appointed there. So 1/3 of the judges are appointed by parliament, and 1/3 of the judges are appointed by Bulgaria's president. And you already see where a problem might occur if parliament is dominated by one party and the president is from that party. This means that 2/3 of the judges have been elected because they have the likability factor in the eyes of this party. And what's also important to know is that the reporting judge in this judgment, before being a judge in this court, was a member of parliament from Boyko Borisov's party. So, you see how political this was. But even further, in this judgment, there are 3 dissenting opinions signed by 4 judges. And all of these judges made overt claims that the majority fell victim to, political favors, public opinion, and made politics and public hysteria enter the courtroom, which is inadmissible. So this is an overt admission by the dissenting members, the dissenting judges in this judgment. Now, as to the consequences of this judgment, there are 2 problems, if you wish. One of them is that this judgment is binding on all courts. And since 2018, it has led to a series of controversial judgments by other courts that also cannot be reversed. And in addition, as I explained earlier in the introduction to this presentation, currently, we can only introduce the Istanbul Convention, or rather the spirit of the Istanbul Convention, through the back door, so by making piecemeal amendments to Bulgarian legislation. And here we're faced with another problem. Once again, populism in Parliament and out of Parliament. We're also faced with a lack of political will, and we're also faced with legislative sloppiness, as illustrated by the latest attempts to do something about this major issue. So first of all, at the beginning of this year, there were two important bills seeking to amend the Bulgarian law on domestic violence that hope to introduce vital changes. They were swamped and brutally killed during the debate, so they were not adopted in the end. But the debate became so heated that at one point those opposing the bills accused those wanting to implement these changes of national betrayal. So it became quite heated and borderline violent with words. And in fact, what motivated the current parliament to do a little bit about this major issue was a horrifying case of domestic violence that made it to the media. So a young girl, she's 17, I think, was brutally attacked with a knife by her boyfriend, and she was disfigured. And this horrifying story motivated thousands of Bulgarians to protest on the streets against domestic violence and to demand change before the government. And only because of these protests, Bulgarian politicians got together and decided to do something, or at least to imitate that they want to do something. And here comes the legislative sloppiness and their tendency to imitate care, if you wish. One of the changes they implemented that on the surface could be interpreted to be positive is extending the protection under the law on domestic violence to people in an intimate relationship. Before this, protection was only available to women who were married or to women who could prove that they were living with someone. So on the surface, this is a positive development. However, the problem is that they introduced a definition of an intimate relationship, and to quote, an intimate relationship is a durable relationship that has lasted at least 60 days. And you already see the absurdity of this, because first of all, why would it matter whether you were assaulted on the 59th day or the 61st day? But also, more importantly, how do you prove such duration in courts? What proof can you use, considering that that's kind of the nature of intimate relationships? They're intimate and private. Also, intimate relationships come in different types. Some people are in an on and off relationship. How do you stop the counter at some point? How do you actually establish the duration? So this is a serious question of proof with which the courts will be confronted, and that doesn't have clear-cut answers. The second problem, I would say, would be amendments, and this is actually, I just discussed the extension of protection. The second line of measures they introduced are alleged measures on prevention. So they are declarative in nature. They introduced provisions declaring Bulgaria's will to fight violence against women. And one of the measures, that is important, or at least on the surface, is the creation of a national council that would coordinate Bulgaria's policy against domestic violence. So on the surface, this is great, but in practice, the legislators left the implementation to the government. And so this is where, the first main problem appears. Any new government could have a radical shift in policy. We've already seen nationalistic far-right parties in government, so should we have such parties in government in the future, the work of this national council would be doomed. But even worse...
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Sure. But even worse, the government recently published a proposal for a regulation of this national council, and this proposal was swamped with criticism. So even Bulgaria's national ombudsman express views that this council is designed in such a way that it will be dysfunctional and wouldn't do any work. So to sum up, sadly, as they say, when there's will, there's way. In Bulgaria, there's not any will to counter this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So could you stay with us for perhaps questions? Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. So the last panelist today roundtable is Josipa, how do you say?
Josipa, yeah.
Josipa Saric, University of Kent, but of Croatian origin. So she will talk about the Croatian case, about the application or conflict about the Istanbul Convention.
There it is, yes. Okay. Great. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Marina, and to the organizers for inviting me to speak here today.
Max, può cambiare lo schermo che ci sono le slides? Grazie. Okay.
Is it working? Yeah? Okay. Right. Thanks again. And I also realized that I am standing between your lunch. So I'm speaking right before your lunchtime. So I will make sure that I, don't take too long. I'm pretty sure we all want to go on. So today I will be talking about the Croatian case, and this panel is precisely about resistance to the Istanbul Convention. So I would like to actually start with a few photos to give you a sense of what was happening in Croatia. To give you a sense of what was happening in Croatia in terms of resistance to the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. So here you have 4 photos. On the top right left hand is an image of 2 priests. The one on the corner is actually a priest that is very much dedicated to students in the University of Zagreb in Croatia, so the capital of Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, and represents kind of a group of individuals from church organizations that attended this major protest that took place on the 24th of March in 2018, leading up to the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. And essentially, this protest was organized and gathered about tens of thousands of individuals at the center of the capital, Zagreb capital. And the bottom photo right under is a photo, and you can see a banner, and essentially it says the meaningless interpretive declaration is just kind of a backdoor for gender ideology to enter. So we're seeing different groups. One is a religious group, one is essentially against this attempt of the government to mitigate the anxieties around gender ideology. Then the top right hand is a photo with a woman holding a banner that says 100% Croatian, so very much speaking to this. I mean, this banner could be there on the square during a football match when everyone is around, kind of cheering on their national team. So we are seeing different motivations coming to the square, protesting against the Istanbul Convention. And then finally at the bottom is Vukovar protiv IK, which is, Vukovar is a symbolic city in Croatia. As a result of the breakup of Yugoslavia, it suffered the most, and it usually is used in discourse to kind of bring about these feelings of what is national identity, what has the nation gone through. So I think these photos really give you a sense of the motivations and the different groups that gathered in that square on that day. And I was there, and it was quite an experience to see such strong resistance against something that then I will show a year later. Crowds again gathered and demanded some sort of action against domestic violence and sexual violence. So today I want to examine 4 questions briefly, because we don't have much time and we have lunch waiting. The first is, how was gender ideology used by these conservative movements? And the second one, how did the government respond to the resistance of the ratification? And then I want to shift our focus a little bit and think about the localized Me Too movements that were taking place exactly a year after, and what they might present to us in terms of challenges and opportunities in pushing for the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in Croatia. And I think there is some overlap in the Bulgarian case, in the Turkey case, in how resistance from the ground and women's movements and LGBT and human rights groups are kind of providing this alternative approach to implementing or bringing focus back to the Istanbul Convention. So I think it's very important to contextualize. This is how I usually do things. And so just to give you a brief context, Croatia is a post-socialist, post-conflict EU member state, and the Croatian Catholic Church has a very strong influence in society. So it is quite common to go to Mass on Sunday and hear a priest talk about politics. This is how individuals are informed about how to orient themselves in their cultural kind of understanding of what it means to be a Croat. And so traditional gender norms are intertwined with nationalist ideology. What does it mean to be a Croat is very much informed by what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. So it's a very gendered question. And so any attempt to challenge gender hierarchies or gender inequality is perceived and sometimes framed by conservative groups as an attack on the nation, on national identity. And so this is really the challenge. And at the same time, we are seeing in this state a country that is an EU member state. So we have principles of equality and non-discrimination embedded in the constitution. Croatia is a party to the CEDAW Convention and its optional protocols, ECHR, and much of its criminal legislation was actually harmonized with the Istanbul Convention at the time of signing, with its new criminal code that came out in 2013. So really, we're seeing the challenges coming from this cultural understanding of what it means to be a Croat and how might this convention be challenging this. And this, I think, that is where the challenges and the opportunity. So the areas in terms of the timeline that I want to look at are the right before the coalition government led by the center-right prime minister ratified, so sent it to parliament right before the parliament ratified the Istanbul Convention. I'm very curious about what happened right before that, and I'm very interested in exactly a year later what happened in 2019 with the localized Me Too movements. And I will briefly just talk about the Grevio's report and the responses that came out. So Grevio released its baseline evaluation report in September. So gender ideology in Croatia, it was right before the ratification, the media was completely, I guess, I don't even know what the word is. It's just completely emerged, submerged, taken over by this debate, a very heated debate about what's going to happen, the dangers of Istanbul Convention, and on the other side, several prominent women's groups, human rights groups, LGBT groups talking about the relevance and significance and importance of implementing and ratifying the Istanbul Convention. And so the public found itself constantly looking at this debate on, is it bad, is it good? It was completely broken down in this very polarized way. The most outspoken opponents to the ratification were the conservative Unimib.It NGO, so in the name of the family, and again we're seeing this kind of common theme across Europe and Turkey as well, this family orientation. So Unimib.It was an NGO that was actually behind the Croatian Constitution's amendments to include a definition of marriage that included man and woman. And they won this in 2013, so the Constitution had changed in that sense. And they were again behind this kind of resistance towards the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. And then a citizens' initiative called The Truth of the Istanbul Convention. So this idea that there's something more than what they're telling you. I have broken down, there were many kind of themes circling in the public discourse and in the public debate, but here I just want to highlight three because they kind of speak to each other and give you a better sense of what exactly were the anxieties of the public as they were approaching that square that day. So first of all, the kind of head of Unimib.It, Željka Markić, at some point in one of these interviews acknowledged that the provisions provided by the Istanbul Convention actually, it is a significant civilizational accomplishment. There was no kind of resistance in acknowledging the significance of the convention. However, the argument was that, well, we already have everything in our legislation, there is no need to implement it. Why do we need this external treaty to come in? And so this argument, suggests, on the one hand, we're losing state sovereignty. It raises this theme of state sovereignty. Why this Grevio monitoring body that is going to kind of come into the state, this loss of state sovereignty, and also suggests and opens up the door for maybe there's something more, and then that flood of debate on gender ideology, which the opponents in Croatia very much approached as a derogatory and all-encompassing term that was used to refer to progressive terms towards gender, views on gender. So that's how they kind of spoke about it. And their initial fear and how the public then kind of took on this discourse was that this notion of gender was going to enter the legal and educational systems of Croatia, and it was going to eradicate the traditional family system. So the important thing to note here is that, and Bosek and Munivrana Vajda, they did a quite extensive article on the fact that gender and gender identity had already integrated into the Croatian legal system. And this was very clear from the Constitutional Court in its communication to the Citizens' Initiative referendum on the definition on marriage, where it clearly stated everybody's rights to respect and to a legitimate protection of their personal and family life and human dignity are protected regardless of gender and sex. So this gender and gender identity had already been introduced. This was not an issue. And what I found quite curious was actually why the focus was not on to what extent had Croatia recognized the structural nature of violence against women and domestic violence, and had it adopted a gender-based definition of violence against women. And how might the Istanbul Convention support this, implement this, right? There was very little discussion on what exactly is structural violence, nature of violence against women, and this idea of gender-based violence. What does it mean? To help the public understand really what is this shift in thinking. And this is very common because, so the focus was missing, yet women's groups in Croatia have been working on this and pushing for this for years. So we're seeing this thing of women's groups discussing it becoming on the platform, but then again, this discourse is shifting to gender ideology. We're again not focusing on the structural nature of violence against women. And here I'd like to kind of highlight, and I think we kind of touched upon it in our discussions, that actually at the core of the Istanbul Convention, we do have a little bit of a problem because there is a duality there. It does adopt a gender-based definition of violence against women, and it does acknowledge that domestic violence is violence of all forms of violence against women, but there is a gender-neutral approach to domestic violence. And in the way that it was also negotiated, there was a political compromise there. And so there is a struggle here. How do we approach violence against women? Is it a gender-neutral approach? Is it a gender-based violence approach? And this is also going to be difficult for the public to understand, which is why this door opens for discussions of gender ideology. And I'm very open to discuss this more because I think it's quite interesting. So what does the government do? The government says, okay, we're going to introduce an interpretive declaration and settle the anxieties of the public, and we are going to clearly say that the provisions of the convention do not include an obligation to introduce gender ideology into the Croatian legal and educational system, and it adds an extra clause, nor the obligation to modify the constitutional definition of marriage. And yet, the opponents were not happy with this and took to the streets. So this protest actually takes place after the government introduces this interpretive declaration. And they found that this declaration had no legal authority to prevent the introduction of the gender ideology, and they felt that it was just a backdoor for the government to do what they wanted. So that was the opponent's view. Interestingly, practice in terms of states is that states use interpretive declarations when strict approaches to reservations are applied. So in this case, there are strict reservations. And so the question is, was the government actually aiming to alleviate the anxieties of the public, or was it trying to find a way to set reservations? And I think it's important to read the situation complexly because it's very easy to create bigger problems by jumping to conclusions and quick conclusions. And here I think we have 2 points that we need to look at. On the one hand, the obligation to modify the constitutional definition of marriage, it could be the state. 2 more minutes? Yes? Okay. It could be that the state is trying to secure that there wouldn't be any changes in the future. On the other hand, this very explicit dismissal of gender ideology entering the legal and educational system could have been its attempt to kind of alleviate the anxieties. It was experiencing at the time, the government, a lot of pressure from the Council of Europe and internal pressures within the party. So there was a lot of kind of political struggle. So I think what's interesting here is to ask, is it legitimizing gender ideology in the law? Or is it providing for an implicit acceptance to completely dismiss its relevance? And I think we need to kind of think about how do we approach this, particularly when we have such populist leaders using rhetoric like this to gain power. So quickly, because I know 2 minutes, what happens exactly a year later, so March 2019, is that we see the streets gather again, and this Me Too movement, a localized Me Too movement in Croatia, which kind of shows that there's a changing strategy of women's movements in Croatia. They're moving beyond just the traditional way of NGOs organizing. It is now going digital. Stories are being shared. It's going beyond just the usual groups. And the demonstrations that took place in March 2019 were for support for victims of domestic violence, and one could see how the connection between these protests and pressure on the government led to stricter penalties for domestic violence. And then October 2019, again, we have a movement that is Justice for Girls, demanded stricter sentences for rape, and again we see that there changes happened in the legal space, so abolishment of the separate offense of sexual intercourse without consent and reclassifying it as rape. Now, I think these protests are essentially opportunities, because similar to the cases that we see in other countries, something happened. These were horrible cases that took place in terms of domestic violence and sexual violence, and people were angry that the government was not doing anything, so they took to the streets. And the government responded with faster action. So what can we do now with this? Now, I thought it was quite interesting that the way that the stories were narrated and the way that the protests were narrated was using these very strong cultural notions of motherhood. And that was unifying, because if we spoke about violence against women from the perspective of mothers, then it was not challenging the conservatives, it was not challenging anyone. Everyone agreed that as a mother, it is horrible to experience violence in the home, to see your child experiencing violence in the home, and at the same time, worrying about the safety of your daughter in the public sphere. So I think, and in conclusion, these protests provide us with some opportunities and challenges. On the one hand, it is allowing us to frame and shift the focus back to violence against women and domestic violence, which got moved away, a lot of talk on gender ideology, which was not the aim. So in a way, we are focusing on what is important without triggering anti-gender backlash. But then we have that challenge of it's decoupling gender discrimination from violence against women. And it's not really looking at or changing or educating on what the root causes are of violence. And so I would like to end on a few notes. First of all, we in Croatia...
It's already 3 minutes.
Okay, one more. I know you have lunch, and then I'm done. So the Grevio released a report, and the immediate headlines in the Croatian news was that Grevio fails Croatia, we still did not learn what gender is, and we are too patriarchal. And so I think this is really interesting because it's, again, trying to shift it back to gender ideology. And this is why we need to be careful about how we talk about what Istanbul Convention is, and it also presents a really important role of education and our university systems so that we understand what is the root causes of violence, so that the shift, we're not giving material to populist leaders, essentially. So that is my conclusion.
Thank you very much.
The opposition about the so-called gender theory. Okay, so just a few questions, then we'll go to it, and it's time. We'll go to lunch. Questions from the audience? Yes,
Hi.
okay. Just I have to see you and who else? Yes, we'll, okay. Then Platek, and then who else? Yes, you, Susanne, and you, the student, and 5. So gather all together. Please, this part, Antonio, then you. Okay.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Cristina Odone. I'm a sociologist. I'm an Italian sociologist based in France, University of Strasbourg. Thank you very much for your presentations. My questions focused on, you have been talking about mostly focusing on how governments struggle implementing the Istanbul Convention or resistance from the government in implementing the Istanbul Convention. I would like you to, all three of you, to focus more on how civil society, grassroots organizations, feminist activists hold up the Istanbul Convention and use it to foster women's rights. And with the case of Croatia, you mentioned it, but if you can, the three of you mentioned something about how what happens in your countries with regard to this.
I would ask that Dr. Rodone also was the first PhD student who got the prize for the best thesis on the Istanbul Convention. Antonio, io direi di proseguire di qua e poi andare dall'altra parte. Allora c'è Susanne, c'è lei. No, we'll go on this line.
Maybe a remark and a question. I got the idea that there's a lot of identity politics going on, and identity politics where the Istanbul Convention is an issue among other issues. And it's just that how can we tackle that populist identity movements or politics? Is it smarter to go into the educational path and say, gosh, we have to be better informed about contents of Istanbul Convention, or do we have to tackle identity politics on a meta level? This is an open question.
I'm Nikki Stanley, Professor of Social Work at the University of Central Lancashire, UK. Thank you for those three really interesting presentations. I agree with the last speaker that the stories and particularly when they're vividly communicated of the Me Too movement have been a really powerful tool in arguing for the Istanbul Convention. And I'm also interested in the place where I think individual stories and numbers meet, which is records of domestic homicides. And I wondered whether in the three countries we've heard about, academics are involved in recording domestic homicides, because I think that data is very powerful.
Thank you very much for the extremely interesting session. And my question to our colleague from Bulgaria is, what is the reaction on this Constitutional Court decision? Because the truth is that it has nothing to do with mixing up gender with reality. The reality are that women are bringing babies, and it's only women, I mean people with the anatomical possibility to give a baby are giving a baby. It has nothing to do with what they are obliged to. So what I'm interested is how far from the educational and juridical point was it tackled in the academia? And thank you very much for this, to the Croat colleague, thank you very much for the tactic to take the whole things from the women perspective. And to the Turkey colleague, well, how far you are really identifying, because the fact that the convention is very much related to the orientation, to the state legal political orientation. When we are going into autocratic country, I don't want to use stronger words, we are using all those arguments which are present in Bulgaria and Croatia and in Turkey. And can this be taken as an argument also that equality
are the really point of departure for keeping to the democratic structures?
If I have understood correctly. Hi everyone, I'm Chiara and I am a sociology student. If I have understood correctly, during the last presentation it was said that the Istanbul Convention has a gender-neutral approach rather than a gender-based approach. So I was wondering if you could please explain what that means in practical terms. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. So just a brief answer, although very complex. Do you want to start? Okay.
Thank you for such nice questions. Well, I will try to answer them all by giving some thoughts on them. Starting with the civil society organizations, because in Turkey, this is all we got now. LGBTI and feminist organizations dates back to the 90s in Turkey, and they're very strong, and they are now using the resources of European Union and some kind of international organizational support, like other organizations. And now we're using those civil society organizations to keep teaching gender equality and Istanbul Convention, but they are now under the eyes of the government. Let's say they targeted the feminist and LGBTI organizations now. They have some lawsuits against them, and they are trying to abolish their, let's say, their organizations through some economic research. How can I put it? Economic kind of financial discussions, and yeah, those society organizations are very, very important for us, and also the academy is very important, but we are under attack also. As I tried to explain in my presentation, they are now closing the gender equality institutions and are turn them into family institutions or social policy institutions. But a group of people, a huge group of feminist academics now trying to concentrate on how to resist this authoritarian attempt, because it is really a democracy issue, as you put it. And when we move on the authoritarian path, we're losing our rights. So I think it is true for all the countries, and Turkey is a good example, unfortunately, good example for that. And just about the data, we have a huge problem about data, and academics couldn't do much about it. And at the Grevio report, Turkey report in 2018, Grevio shed light on it, but government refused to share the data at their hand. So we are trying to do again a civil society work to get them together. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vasilea. Francesco, forse c'è oppure Max, se c'è ancora l'altra relatrice online per le risposte, c'è? Okay, Vasilea, please.
Thank you very much for your very insightful questions. As regard to civil society, I'm afraid that in Bulgaria, civil society is quite underdeveloped. There are just a small number of feminist journalists and maybe just several NGOs that are dealing with women's rights, and some of them actually have been harassed by the government. So if you wish, in Bulgaria, when it comes to civil society, there was a wake-up call only this summer, only a few months ago after this scandal I explained in my presentation. Now, when it comes to numbers, sadly, there's no official database yet. Numbers are gathered by these NGOs, so we don't know how reliable they are. So this is another problem Bulgaria is facing. And then relatedly, because you asked me about academic criticism, I'm not aware of any scholars researching the Istanbul Convention systemically. And I explained this just with the fact that Bulgarian academia traditionally knows that, criticizing the government could be dangerous, and this was a heavily political issue, and the government took the conservative side, so they stay away from such controversies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you are not in present next time. Okay, please,
I think just to clarify on the last question in terms of the Okay. I suppose because we're out of time, I'll just clarify on the last question in terms of the Istanbul Convention. So I think it's a dual approach. It's not just gender neutral. And I think the gender neutral aspect is seen in the way that domestic violence is seen as in victims of all domestic violence. So it, at the same time, acknowledges that women are disproportionately affected, but then again emphasizes all victims, are victims of domestic violence. And I think that is where the political compromise is, of including both, is not very clearly a gender-based violence approach. And that could be confusing in terms of implementation. But happy to discuss this a bit more later. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
To all panelists, to other guests, in present or online. So lunch, as said, there are many restaurants on the back of this building, and Piazza Tribulziana on the first floor, minus one floor. So we'll see here, I hope, starting from 2 o'clock for the next panels. Thank you.